Hey guys, tonight we drift back 2 centuries to an island so lonely that even the sea seems to whisper exile. You find yourself standing on the volcanic cliffs of St. Helena, a pinprick of rock in the South Atlantic. The air is thick, salty, and damp. Your shirt sticks to your skin. Below, waves crash against black basalt like the echo of cannon fire long faded. Somewhere inland, behind tangled hedges and a line of wind-bent pines, sits Longwood House, the place where the world's most feared man spends his days pacing, dictating, remembering. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into Longwood's drawing room, where the wallpaper curls from the walls and a faint mildew odor clings to everything. The former emperor of the French sits at a battered table covered in books. Plutarch, Caesar, the Iliad, all the great conquerors who came before him. His uniform jacket, once brilliant blue, now looks tired, its gold braid dulled by the island's relentless humidity. He looks up at you, eyes sharp but weary, and says, almost to himself, "The battle was lost, but not my memory of it." You can't tell whether he's talking to you or to the ghosts that haunt him. Every afternoon, Napoleon Bonaparte relives June 18, 1815, replaying each cannon shot, each courier's message, each cloudburst that turned the fields of Belgium into mud. Some evenings he insists it was fate, others treachery, and occasionally, on the rare nights when the Atlantic wind falls still, he whispers that it was simply exhaustion. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's confinement was unusually cruel or just a political necessity. What's certain is that St. Helena was no palace. It was remote enough that escape was impossible, and the British governor, Sir Hudson Lowe, was no admirer of his famous guest. Soldiers patrolled the hills, ships circled the coast, and even Napoleon's garden walks were timed and logged. It's a curious fate for a man who once measured his domain in millions of square miles. You watch him trace a line across an old campaign map spread before him. His finger follows a path from Paris to Brussels and stops at a small dot labeled Waterloo. He presses down as if he could erase the place by sheer force of will. Then, in that soft Corsican accent that still clings to his French, he murmurs, "Had it not rained." Outside, rain does fall, because it always does here. The shutters rattle, the oil lamp flickers. You imagine the same sound echoing in the emperor's head, the endless drumming of rain on canvas before that final battle. Even now, he keeps a little model of the field on his desk. Tiny soldiers lined up in rows of red and blue, their tin faces frozen forever at the moment before dawn. Napoleon tells you stories between bouts of melancholy. He remembers the Tuileries Palace, the coronation robes, the smell of gunpowder at Austerlitz, and the way Europe trembled when he raised his hand. Yet, when he speaks of Waterloo, something in his tone shifts. It's not anger so much as disbelief. You sense that he still cannot accept that destiny, a thing he once bent to his will, had finally refused him. He shows you a chest filled with medals and correspondence, and tucked between them, a letter to his son, the King of Rome. The ink has bled with age, but you can still read the line, "Fortune has abandoned your father. May she never abandon you." There's a fringe anecdote about how Napoleon, in these years, insisted on being called general rather than emperor. Some say it was humility. Others think it was defiance, a reminder that, titles aside, he was still a soldier. Late at night, when the household sleeps, he walks outside, his boots squelching in the wet grass. He looks up at the Southern Cross, stars he'd never seen in Europe, and perhaps wonders if Alexander the Great, whom he idolized, would have recognized him now. He once told a visitor that his greatest mistake wasn't Waterloo, but not dying at Waterloo. You can't help but feel a chill at that. a reminder that even titans can wish for smaller endings. And yet, amid the damp misery of exile, Napoleon remains strangely alive. He dictates his memoirs, sometimes for 12 hours at a stretch, to his loyal attendants Montholon and Gourgaud. They complain their hands cramp from writing. He laughs and tells them, then history will be cramped too. Those pages will later ignite Europe's imagination, transforming the defeated tyrant into a romantic hero, the man who dared the impossible, a mainstream historical fact. On this island, Napoleon wrote roughly 40,000 pages of notes, letters, and recollections, enough to fill dozens of volumes. A quirky tidbit, he even designed his own wallpaper pattern for Longwood, featuring bees and laurel wreaths, the old imperial symbols. Proof that even in captivity, he couldn't stop redecorating empires, if only on paper. Historians still argue whether his guards poisoned him slowly or whether his death in 1821 was simply due to stomach cancer, like his father's. But you sense he preferred the more dramatic version. Poison suited the myth better than medicine. You sit across from him as the lamplight deepens into gold. He tells you how he studied Julius Caesar as a boy, memorizing battles instead of bedtime prayers. You realize that for Napoleon, history was never past. It was a play in which he fully intended to star. Now, stripped of his stage, he becomes its narrator. There's something poetic, almost cinematic, in that reversal. The conqueror turned chronicler, speaking softly into the darkness while waves gnaw at the cliffs outside. He pours you a glass of watered-down wine. Do you think, he asks, that men are born for greatness, or do they seize it when no one else dares? You hesitate. He smiles, half amused. It doesn't matter. Both paths end here. He gestures toward the endless ocean. You hear the surf and imagine the thunder of artillery again, indistinguishable now, both rolling rhythms fading into one another. Then, without warning, he chuckles. Do you know, he says, they still call me short? I was average height for my time. If they must insult me, let them call me unlucky instead. It's one of the few jokes he allows himself. You smile too, because there's a certain comfort in realizing that even history's giants worry about their Wikipedia summaries. The lamp sputters. He takes up his quill again and begins to write, his handwriting still bold. You glance over his shoulder and catch the line forming. Impossible is a word to be found only in the dictionary of fools. It's the kind of statement that could fuel 1,000 motivational posters. But here, on this drenched island, it reads like both prophecy and epitaph. As you watch, the ink blotches, the page smudges, and the room begins to fade around you. Outside, thunder rolls across the Atlantic, blending with the distant roar of cannon fire from another time. You realize you're no longer in Longwood House, but somewhere between memory and battlefield, drawn back through Napoleon's restless dreams toward the muddy ridges of Belgium where his fate was sealed. You can still hear his voice behind you, faint but insistent. If only I had one more morning. You blink, and suddenly you're not on the island anymore. The salt air fades into the crisp chill of early spring. Paris is stirring awake again, 1815, its streets alive with gossip, fear, and the distant rhythm of boots. You stand among a crowd gathered near the city gates, watching as a single horseman approaches, his gray coat dusty, his face set with impossible confidence. The whispers ripple outward like wind over wheat. He's back. Napoleon Bonaparte, exiled to Elba less than a year ago, has returned. No army of conquest, just a few hundred loyal men and a reputation that still frightens kings. He rides straight toward the soldiers sent to arrest him. They raise their muskets. He opens his coat and shouts, "If any of you would shoot your emperor, here I am." No one fires. Instead, one by one, they kneel. You feel the electricity of it, the raw magnetism that once reshaped the continent. Within days, the exiled emperor has become the head of state again. Without a single battle, the man cast off by Europe retakes France. Historians still argue whether this was genius or madness, but for now, it feels like destiny, pressing resume. The newspapers call it the flight of the eagle. His journey north from the Mediterranean, gathering followers like a storm gathers clouds. At Grenoble, at Lyon, at Auxerre, entire regiments defect to him. Marshals who once betrayed him now stumble back into his shadow, eager to be forgiven. Even Parisians who had cursed his name now line the streets, cheering as he enters the city on March 20th. From a balcony of the Tuileries Palace, Napoleon gazes at the city that once crowned him. The tricolor flies again. He speaks briefly to his old guard, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying exhaustion. France, he says, was not conquered. She was betrayed. The soldiers roar. You can almost feel the floor tremble beneath their boots. A mainstream historical fact. During this brief return, later known as the 100 Days, Napoleon completely reorganized his government, restored the constitution, and attempted to reconcile with liberals and monarchists alike. A quirky detail: his first act back in power was to personally order 1,500 new imperial uniforms, just in case Europe needed reminding that fashion and empire had the same tailor. But he knows the celebration will be short. Across the continent, the crowned heads of Europe snarl and sign new treaties. Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain unite in a seventh coalition, swearing not just to defeat Napoleon, but to destroy him permanently. The ink on those declarations isn't even dry when the Prussian General Blücher and the British Duke of Wellington begin moving their armies toward the French frontier. Inside the Tuileries, Napoleon works day and night. You can hear him dictating orders faster than his aides can write. His fingers drum the table while maps sprawl beneath him. His plan is simple, brilliant, and desperate. Strike before they unite. Destroy one army, then the other, and perhaps France can negotiate peace. You watch him in candlelight. The circles under his eyes dark as bruises. He's older now, 45, but still burns with that dangerous clarity that made him a legend. One aide mutters that he seems thinner. Another swears he never sleeps. And when he does, they say he mutters names. Austerlitz, Jena, Moscow. Historians still argue whether his health was already failing. Some note his constant pain, the headaches, the stomach cramps. Others claim it was merely the weight of 10 years of war pressing down at last. Either way, the fire hasn't gone out. It just flickers differently now, casting longer shadows. By early June, the Grande Armée stands ready again. About 72,000 men, veterans and raw recruits side by side. Their uniforms may be faded, their boots cracked, but their loyalty is iron. As drums roll through the night, you walk among them. They polish muskets, murmur old songs, joke that the emperor looks shorter each time they see him. You grin. The myth of Little Boney never dies. At dawn, Napoleon rides before the ranks. "Soldiers!" he cries, his voice echoing across the camp. "The enemy says you are cowards. They say the eagle will fall once more. Show them how a French soldier answers." Thousands of voices thunder back. "Vive l'Empereur!" The sound alone could raise ghosts from Austerlitz. That's when you notice something else, a peculiar tension beneath the cheers. The officers around Napoleon look uneasy. Many of his best marshals are gone, dead, retired, or loyal to the restored monarchy. In their place stand men who are brave but inexperienced, uncertain whether they serve a hero reborn or a man grasping at yesterday's glory. One officer whispers, "He commands ghosts." Another, bolder, replies, "Then may they fight like ghosts." The emperor's plan unfolds quickly. He will strike north into Belgium, smash Wellington's Anglo-Allied army before the Prussians can join them, and force Britain to negotiate. It's a familiar dance: swift movement, divided enemies, decisive victory. But even as he maps the routes, the reality of 1815 keeps intruding. Roads are muddy, supplies thin, morale mixed. France is tired, Europe is waiting. And yet, you can't help but admire the audacity. It's like watching a chess master play his final game, knowing the board is already tilted against him. You travel with the vanguard as they cross the border. The fields smell of wet grass and gun oil. In the distance, church bells ring, then stop. The drums take over. The 100 days are hurtling toward their reckoning. On June 15th, the first real clash comes at Charleroi. French columns move like clockwork. Villagers peer from windows as blue-coated soldiers flood the town. The speed of it is breathtaking. Napoleon's old genius for surprise still intact. The Prussian and British forces, scattered across Belgium, are caught off guard. It's working. For a brief moment, the ghost of Austerlitz walks again. You hear soldiers shout that the emperor has returned to his old self. He seems energized, commanding with precision, laughing even. There's a famous anecdote, perhaps exaggerated, that he eats nothing but a single roast chicken that entire day, saying, "We'll feast after Brussels." But war has a way of rewriting dinner plans. As night falls, courier after courier brings reports. Minor victories at Quatre Bras, a larger one at Ligny. Napoleon's chest swells with pride. He's beaten Blücher and driven the Prussians back. But as he scans the dispatches, a frown forms. The British under Wellington haven't retreated toward the sea as expected. They've fallen back north, toward a small village whose name will soon fill every textbook, Waterloo. You see the calculation in Napoleon's eyes. He knows time is everything. If he can crush Wellington before Blücher regroups, France might yet stand. If not, well, he doesn't finish that thought. A mainstream fact here. On June 17th, Napoleon ordered Marshal Grouchy with 34,000 men to pursue the retreating Prussians and prevent their junction with the British. It was a sound move, but one that would prove fatal. A quirky tidbit, Napoleon reportedly joked that day about the British breakfast habits, saying, "They fight best after tea. Let's strike before the kettle boils." Historians still argue whether Grouchy's assignment was too vague or too ambitious. Some claim Napoleon underestimated how quickly the Prussians could recover. Others believe he simply overestimated Grouchy's initiative. Either way, the chess pieces were now in motion, and the board was slick with rain. That night, a storm breaks, one of those biblical tempests that seem to follow great men toward disaster. Lightning flashes across the Belgian sky as soldiers struggle to keep their powder dry. The emperor, soaked and coughing, watches the horizon from beneath his greatcoat. His aides urge him to rest. He waves them off. Through the darkness, you hear him whisper, half to himself, half to the rain, "Tomorrow, we'll finish this." And you know he believes it. The man who once crowned himself emperor still imagines he can command fate. You can almost feel the story tightening, coiling, waiting for that single day, the last and greatest of Napoleon's long career. The wind whips the tricolor flag against its pole, snapping like a drumbeat. Around you, men huddle under soaked tents, dreaming of victory, glory, maybe just dry socks. One mutters, "If it rains again, I'll drown before the enemy shoots me." Another replies, "At least it'll save us the trouble of digging graves." They laugh, because soldiers always laugh when the alternative is fear. Morning will come soon enough. The cannons are silent for now, but the earth remembers their weight. You close your eyes and think of St. Helena, of an old man tracing maps by candlelight, whispering, "Had it not rained?" And suddenly, you understand. Dawn creeps over the Belgian plain, slow and gray, like a curtain lifting on a play whose ending everyone already knows, but no one dares to admit. You stand on a ridge near the village of Waterloo, the air still thick with the smell of rain and trampled grass. The fields glisten, muddy, slick, and treacherous. Soldiers curse as their boots sink ankle-deep into the sludge. Horses snort, cannon wheels groan, and somewhere far off, a bugle sounds the first call of the day. You glance eastward. There, faint through the mist, the Prussian army is regrouping. You can't see them yet, but their presence presses on the horizon like a dark promise. Napoleon knows they're out there, and that knowledge gnaws at him. Still, his mind works as quickly as ever, Strike the British under Wellington first. Crush them before the Prussians arrive. If he can destroy one army before the other appears, France might yet snatch survival from the mud. In Paris, people still drink toasts to his name. But here, on these sodden fields, his fate will be decided by rain, timing, and luck. 3 things even an emperor can't control. A mainstream historical fact. The Seventh Coalition, Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and their allies, had mobilized nearly 1 million men to finish Napoleon once and for all. Yet at this moment, only Wellington's and Blücher's armies are close enough to matter. The rest are weeks away. If Napoleon wins today, he might force Europe to bargain. If he loses, well, there won't be another exile cushioned by titles. He surveys the landscape through his telescope. Ahead, the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean hides much of Wellington's army. The Duke has positioned his troops cleverly, using what's called the reverse slope defense. Men hidden on the far side of the ridge, invisible to French artillery. You can barely see their red coats from here, but you sense their steadiness. They wait, silent, patient, like chess pieces carved from stone. Napoleon lowers the glass. He knows Wellington by reputation, cautious, methodical, the opposite of his own impulsive brilliance. Somewhere deep down, the emperor respects him. He mutters, "That Englishman. He never makes mistakes, but he never wins a great victory either." Then he smiles, as if the universe has just given him permission to prove that wrong. The French camp stirs to life. Drums beat, men stretch stiff limbs, officers shout orders that vanish in the wind. The mud squelches with every movement. You watch soldiers try to light fires, only to curse as the rain snuffs them out. Even the horses look miserable, their flanks caked with wet clay. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's decision to delay the battle until midday was his fatal mistake. The ground was too wet, he said. The cannon would bog down. Waiting a few hours would let the field dry, but those hours would also give Blücher and the Prussians time to march closer. Was it prudence or paralysis? You'll never know. But as the minutes tick past and the sun struggles through the clouds, you feel the tension coil tighter. Around 11 a.m., Napoleon rides along the front line. He salutes the men, his familiar silhouette, gray coat, bicorn hat, cutting through the drizzle. The soldiers cheer, voices hoarse but fierce. Someone yells, "Vive l'Empereur!" Another answers, "Death to the English!" The old fire flickers again. He turns to Marshal Soult, his chief of staff, and says, "We'll begin with Hougoumont. It will draw Wellington's reserves." Soult nods, but his expression is uneasy. The Chateau of Hougoumont, a fortified farmhouse on Wellington's right flank, is strong, garrisoned by British guards. It's supposed to be a feint, just a distraction. But the Emperor's orders, as always, have a way of expanding once the cannons speak. At precisely 11:35, the first French guns roar. You flinch as the sound hits, thunder layered with metal. The earth trembles. Cannonballs tear into the soft ground, sending fountains of mud skyward. The French infantry, coats darkened by rain, begin their march toward Hougoumont, muskets slung, bayonets gleaming dully. You walk with them, mud sucking at your boots. The chateau rises ahead, stone walls half hidden by smoke. British rifles crack from behind the garden wall. The first French wave falls, the second presses forward. It's supposed to be quick, drive them out, burn the place, fall back. But soon the narrow lanes fill with bodies, and officers shout for reinforcements. Napoleon, watching through his glass, frowns but waves another brigade forward. A quirky tidbit. Amid the chaos, a French drummer boy, perhaps 12 years old, is said to have climbed a tree near Hougoumont to beat the advance rhythm. When a British bullet snapped the drum strap, he caught it mid-air and kept playing until he was shot down. No one remembers his name, but his courage gets mentioned in almost every veteran's memoir. Hour after hour, the fight for Hougoumont drags on. Flames lick at the farmhouse. Smoke mixes with the smell of wet hay and blood. You can hear the British commander shouting, "Close the gates! Hold the orchard!" Inside, men stab through gaps in the doors with bayonets. Outside, French grenadiers claw at the walls, desperate to break in. By mid-afternoon, what should have been a diversion has become an obsession. Napoleon keeps feeding troops into the meat grinder, convinced the British must be weakening. They aren't. The guards inside Hougoumont stand firm, their ammunition running low, but their discipline unbroken. One of them later wrote, "We knew we fought for time." Meanwhile, on the French right, another attack begins toward La Haye-Sainte, the farmhouse at the center of Wellington's line. The cannon thunder again, and the wind carries the acrid tang of powder straight into your lungs. It's intoxicating and nauseating all at once. You glance back toward Napoleon's command post. He sits astride his horse, telescope in hand, rain beating on his hat. For a moment, he looks like the emperor of old, calm, analytical, untouchable. But when a courier brings word that the ground is still too wet for the cavalry to charge effectively, he grimaces. He knows time is bleeding away with every passing minute. Historians still debate whether Napoleon underestimated Wellington's defensive skill or overestimated his own army's cohesion. Many of his officers were new, their units cobbled together from veterans and conscripts. Coordination was sloppy, orders arrived late. Even the great artillery advantage, nearly 250 guns to the Allies' 150, meant little when the cannonballs buried themselves harmlessly in mud, instead of ricocheting through enemy ranks. You catch snippets of conversation among the emperor's staff. One aide mutters, "The Prussians are closer than we think." Another insists, "Grouchy will keep them busy." Napoleon overhears and says quietly, "He must." It sounds less like command than prayer. By early afternoon, the rain has eased, but the smoke thickens. The whole world smells of sulfur and wet soil. You can barely tell where the horizon ends and the battle begins. In the distance, the British ridge looks untouched. Serene even, an illusion of course. Beneath that calm, thousands of men crouch, waiting. The emperor orders another push toward the center. "Break them there," he says, "and the day is ours." His marshals nod, though their eyes say otherwise. You can sense it. The moment where confidence and delusion blur. Napoleon's genius is still present, but something else, fatigue, maybe pride, has begun to dull its edge. You step back from the chaos, trying to take in the panorama. To your right, cannon crews reload, the smell of burnt linen filling the air. To your left, wounded men stumble toward the rear, faces pale beneath layers of mud. Somewhere a horse screams, a sound more human than animal. And through it all, the drums keep beating, steady as a heart refusing to stop. A fringe rumor floats among the ranks that Napoleon's lucky star, once said to shine above him in every battle, was invisible this morning. Some swear they saw clouds swallow it as the rain began. Others say that's nonsense. Stars don't fight battles, one gunner grunts. Men do. Still, you catch soldiers glancing upward between volleys, searching the gray sky for something bright. The clock creeps past 2, then 3. You wipe soot from your face, your ears ringing. Napoleon's gamble, to crush Wellington before the Prussians arrive, still hangs in the balance. The French have numbers, courage, and artillery, but the British have terrain, discipline, and a duke who seems carved from oak. You look once more toward the emperor's post. He's silent now, eyes narrowed. Somewhere in that mind, plans are unraveling and reforming at lightning speed. You wonder what he's thinking, perhaps of Caesar crossing the Rubicon, or Alexander at Gaugamela, or simply of tomorrow's headlines. Either way, the day is far from over. The guns are just getting warm. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, comes a new sound, a rolling thunder not of weather, but of marching feet. The Prussians are coming. You turn toward that distant rumble, half hoping it's thunder again, but it isn't. It's too rhythmic, too human. Drums, boots, cannon wheels. The Prussians are moving, their advance hidden by forest and mist. but the vibration underfoot tells the truth long before the scouts confirm it. Somewhere east of Waterloo, tens of thousands of men under Field Marshal Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher are closing in, answering Napoleon's worst nightmare. Still, the emperor refuses to flinch. You can almost admire the stubborn confidence radiating from him, as if he believes sheer willpower can hold the continent together. He turns to Marshal Soult and dictates an order. Grouchy will keep them engaged. We will finish Wellington before they arrive. The aide gallops off, his horse kicking up clods of mud that splatter your coat. Historians still argue whether Napoleon truly understood how close Blücher's army already was. Messages from Marshal Grouchy sent earlier that morning were vague. Prussians retreating east, he had written. But by the time the courier reached headquarters, those words were hours old, already fossils of a shifting battlefield. You look toward the northeast, where a smudge of forest lies beyond the ridges. That's where Grouchy should be, 34,000 men chasing ghosts through the Belgian countryside. But now, you realize, the ghosts have doubled back. Meanwhile, at Waterloo, the emperor presses forward. It's early afternoon. The rain has stopped, and the first faint shafts of sun break through the clouds, glinting on musket barrels. Napoleon decides it's time to break the stalemate. He gives the signal for a general assault along the British center near La Haye-Sainte. You follow as French infantry form up, columns of bluecoats moving like rolling walls. The drums beat the pas de charge, that eerie, slow rhythm that makes your pulse sync with theirs. Ahead, the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean looms like a sleeping giant. The first cannon volleys roar, and the ground trembles beneath your boots. Mud and smoke mix into a gray haze. The air smells of burnt wool, gunpowder, and rain. You hear men coughing, shouting, praying. The French push forward, bayonets glittering like a field of thorns. Behind them, the artillery opens up again. 250 French guns, each spitting death in perfect rhythm. You can't even hear yourself think. Cannonballs ricochet off the ridge, whistling past like angry gods. But when the French reach the base of the slope, something strange happens. The enemy isn't there. The ridge looks deserted. The men hesitate, glancing around, unsure whether the British have fled. Then, suddenly, the ridge explodes in smoke. From just beyond the crest, Wellington's troops rise up in line formation, muskets leveled. You catch the gleam of scarlet coats, the flash of steel. 1,000 guns fire at once. The sound is less a crack than a flat, rolling boom that seems to tear the air itself. French soldiers drop in waves, entire files cut down. Yet those behind keep marching, stepping over the fallen. The French columns pour fire back, but the narrow formation traps their volleys. Only the front few ranks can shoot. "Forward!" the officers scream. "Vive l'Empereur!" A mainstream historical fact. Wellington's use of the reverse slope defense was revolutionary. By hiding his troops on the far side of the ridge, he shielded them from artillery fire and allowed them to appear suddenly at point-blank range. Historians still teach the maneuver as one of the most brilliant tactical choices in 19th century warfare. You crouch behind a broken fence as French cannon shells burst nearby, showering you with dirt. The noise is relentless, so loud it's almost silent, as if your ears simply give up. And then, cutting through it all, comes the deep, unmistakable thump, thump, thump of hooves, cavalry. Marshal Michel Ney, the bravest of the brave, sees what looks like movement in the British line. To him, it means retreat. He doesn't wait for confirmation. Instead, he does what bold men often do. He acts. "Cavalry, forward!" he bellows. You watch in disbelief as 5,000 French horsemen surge forward, cuirassiers gleaming in breastplates, lancers lowering pennants, dragoons screaming war cries that vanish in the wind. It's magnificent, terrible, and entirely premature. The ground shakes, horses slip in the mud, riders shout, sabers flash. They charge uphill toward the ridge where Wellington's army waits. You can almost hear the British officers' calm voices. Form square! Form square! In seconds, the scarlet lines fold in on themselves, transforming into bristling boxes of men. 4 ranks deep, bayonets outward, flags planted at the center. To a cavalryman, it's like charging a forest of knives. The French slam into the first square. Horses rear, scream, and fall. Riders tumble, blades clashing against steel and flesh. The squares hold. Musket fire at point-blank range drops riders and mounts alike. Still, Ney sends them in again and again. By the 4th charge, the air is filled with black powder smoke so thick you can't see 10 paces ahead. You taste it in your mouth, bitter, metallic. Somewhere in the haze, Ney's voice rises hoarse. Forward! The day is ours, but the day is not his. A quirky tidbit. One British sergeant later wrote that between cavalry charges, soldiers inside the squares calmly smoked pipes and shared swigs of gin, joking they'd wait for the next dance. Whether true or exaggerated, it speaks to the eerie discipline of Wellington's troops, men who could mock death between volleys. By late afternoon, Ney's magnificent cavalry is shattered. Thousands of horses lie writhing in the mud. Yet the British line still stands. Wellington, expression stoic, simply mutters, "Hard pounding, gentlemen. Let's see who pounds the longest." Historians still argue whether Ney's charge was madness or necessity. Some say he misread the battlefield through the smoke. Others believe his earlier request for infantry support had been ignored. Napoleon, meanwhile, had shifted focus, worried now about the approaching Prussians. He could not see what Ney saw. The left hand no longer knew what the right was doing. And then, from the east, the first shells fall. Prussian artillery fire landing near the village of Plancenoit. Grouchy has failed. The tide has turned. You look at Napoleon. For the first time today, uncertainty flickers across his face. He orders a division to counter the new threat. "Hold Plancenoit," he commands. "Buy me time." The men march away, disappearing into the smoky distance. You realize how thin his reserves have become. The emperor glances back at La Haye-Sainte, where Ney's exhausted troops are still hammering at the farmhouse. He mutters something you barely catch. Too soon or too late. The afternoon light grows harsh, slanting across the churned fields. The mud now shines red, and the smell of smoke and iron hangs heavy. You can sense the soldiers' exhaustion, hands trembling as they reload, mouths blackened from biting cartridges, eyes hollow but burning. And then, a strange moment of stillness. The guns pause, as if the world itself inhales. Across the battlefield, flags hang limp in the sudden calm. You hear the creak of saddles, the murmur of prayer, the distant clatter of empty canteens. Napoleon straightens in his saddle. "One more push," he says quietly, "just one." He signals to the Imperial Guard, his last reserve, his most loyal soldiers, veterans of Austerlitz, Friedland, Wagram. They stand ready in immaculate ranks, tall bearskin hats shadowing faces that have seen every corner of Europe. The Emperor rides past them, his expression a mask of calm. "You know me," he says. "You know what is expected." A cheer rolls through their ranks. "Vive l'Empereur!" It's not loud, more a vow than a shout. You feel it in your bones. But before they can move, another messenger gallops in, mud spraying from his horse's hooves. "Sire, the Prussians are breaking through," he gasps. Napoleon's jaw tightens. He hesitates only a second, then waves the guard forward anyway. The decision is made. As they march toward the ridge, the sun dips behind the clouds again, plunging the field into shadow. You realize this is the pivot, the hinge on which history will turn. A fringe anecdote says that one of the guard sergeants murmured, "The sun of Austerlitz has set." Whether he truly said it or some later historian embroidered the line, it feels right. The guard advances into the smoke. Behind you, the Emperor watches, silent, his gloved hand resting on his sword. Somewhere deep inside, he must already know. Because once you send in your last card, the game is over. win or lose. Evening descends over Waterloo, but no one notices the sunset. The light is strange, thin, and metallic, casting long shadows that look like smoke made solid. You stand just behind the Emperor's position, boots half buried in mud, watching the last great gamble of his life unfold below. The Imperial Guard, his proudest creation, begins its march toward the ridge. They move slowly, deliberately, like an ancient tide rolling toward a rocky shore. Each step sinks deep. The earth itself seems to resist them. They are veterans of 20 years of war, men who have seen Moscow burn, who crossed the Alps and the Nile, who outlived empires. To them, Napoleon is not a man but a myth made flesh, the star that guided them across a continent. When he raises his hand, they move without hesitation. "Forward, my children," he says quietly, his voice almost drowned by cannon fire. "The victory is in your hands." A mainstream historical fact. The Imperial Guard consisted of roughly 10,000 of the finest troops in Europe, grenadiers, chasseurs, and artillery elite. Many were middle-aged by 1815, hardened survivors from earlier campaigns. A quirky detail, they called themselves les grognards, the grumblers, because they were the only soldiers allowed to complain in the Emperor's presence. He trusted them so completely that their sarcasm was treated as affection. The drums beat the slow advance. Fifes wail above the roar of artillery. Somewhere ahead, Wellington's men tighten their lines, staring down the slope. They know what's coming. The Guard has never been defeated in open battle. The British officers whisper orders. Muskets are cleaned, bayonets fixed. No one speaks above a murmur. You watch the French columns advance, 4 lines deep. Cannon smoke hides them, then reveals them again like a nightmare blinking in and out of reality. Their bearskin caps look almost ghostly in the dusk. They move up the slope, steady despite the pounding of British artillery. Shells burst among them, but the formation keeps reforming, men closing ranks around the fallen, as if death itself were merely another maneuver. Behind them, Napoleon sits astride his horse, silent. He does not cheer, does not gesture. His face is pale, drawn tight. You imagine him thinking of Austerlitz, when the dawn light broke across frozen lakes and victory came like a sunrise. Now the light is dying, and he can almost feel it slipping away. Historians still argue whether this final assault was ordered too late or too soon. Some claim Napoleon should have unleashed the Guard hours earlier, when Wellington's center first wavered. Others believe the delay was tactical prudence. But to you, standing here, it feels like fate hesitating, too cautious to be bold, too proud to retreat. The Guard reaches the base of the ridge. The drummers quicken their pace. The officers draw swords. You can hear the rhythmic chant echo across the field. Vive l'Empereur! Vive l'Empereur! It sounds less like a cheer and more like a heartbeat. Then, silence. A strange, heavy quiet falls. The kind that comes before the world breaks. For a breath, you can hear nothing but the wind. Then, the ridge erupts. From behind the crest, the British line appears as if conjured, 2 ranks deep, red coats flashing in the fading light. Wellington himself gives the order. Up, Guards, and at them! The command travels like lightning. 1,000 muskets fire as one. The volley hits the Imperial Guard point blank. The first ranks collapse instantly. Smoke swallows the scene. You can taste the burnt powder, feel the concussive wave rattle your chest. Another volley follows, then another. The Guard staggers, reforms, pushes forward again. Officers scream for them to hold the line, but now, from their flank, another storm of fire erupts. The 52nd Oxfordshire Light Infantry, sweeping down in perfect formation, muskets blazing. The Guard begins to buckle, the precision of veterans unraveling into chaos. You see a French colonel fall backward, his saber still raised. Another catches the eagle standard before it hits the mud, lifting it high with both hands, shouting, La Garde meurt, mais ne se rend pas. The Guard dies, it does not surrender. Whether he truly said it is debated. The phrase may have been invented later. stitched into legend like embroidery on a tattered flag. But you hear it anyway, carried on the smoke, echoing across centuries. The British advance downhill, bayonets gleaming. The guard fires one last ragged volley, then turns, not in surrender, but in shock. For the first time in history, they are retreating. Someone yells, "Sauve qui peut!" Save yourself if you can. And the words spread faster than any command. Napoleon stares, frozen, as his invincible army begins to crumble. He tries to rally them, rides forward shouting, "Form up! Form up!" But panic is faster than courage. Whole units break apart. The proud Imperial Guard, once the heart of an empire, dissolves into fragments of running men. A mainstream historical fact. By 8:30 p.m., the French line was collapsing on every front. Blücher's Prussians had smashed through at Plançois, threatening the rear, while Wellington's troops pressed forward in the center. The battlefield had become a single swirling mass of smoke, gunfire, and screams. A quirky tidbit: as darkness fell, Wellington's own horse, Copenhagen, reared so violently that he nearly threw the Duke off. The commander later patted the horse's neck and said calmly, "You may stop now, my friend. We've done it." You move with the retreating tide. Men stumbling through mud, faces blackened, voices hoarse from shouting. Horses crash into wagons, cannon wheels spin uselessly. The air reeks of gunpowder and fear. Behind you, the last square of the Old Guard forms near La Belle Alliance, a final act of defiance. Surrounded, cut off, they stand back to back, firing until the barrels glow red. When the ammunition runs out, they fix bayonets and wait. British officers shout offers of quarter. The reply is simple: merde. Historians still debate who uttered that immortal insult, but it hardly matters. The sentiment speaks for an empire's pride. Crude, fierce, unbroken, even in ruin. Farther up the slope, Wellington removes his hat. "Knight or Blücher," he says, "I shall never forget this field." His staff stand in stunned silence. The Duke has won, but he looks like a man who's aged a decade in a single day. Down below, Napoleon watches his army dissolve. His horse sidesteps nervously. Aides tug at his reins, urging him to leave. For a long moment, he doesn't move. You wonder what's passing through his mind. Pride? Disbelief? Grief? Perhaps he's thinking of his son, the boy he hoped would inherit more than defeat. At last, he lowers his telescope, whispers something no one catches, and turns his horse toward the south. The moon rises behind a veil of smoke. The battlefield glows with fires, wagon wheels burning, wounded men clutching each other for warmth. The noise fades into distant moans, the occasional musket shot finishing what the cannons began. You walk among the wreckage. A French drummer lies face down in the mud, his small drum cracked beside him. Nearby, a British ensign slumps against a shattered tree, staring at the stars with unseeing eyes. The air hums with flies already gathering. A strange calm settles, a silence heavier than sound. The guns have stopped, but your ears keep ringing. You look back once more at the ridge where the guard fell. It's littered with broken muskets, flags trampled into the mud, and faces that once believed they were immortal. Somewhere, faintly, you think you hear Napoleon's voice carried on the wind. If my right had done its duty, if Grouchy had returned, if the rain had not fallen, the endless chain of ifs that men forged to bind themselves to lost glory. You start to walk south, following the Emperor's path. The fires behind you flicker like dying constellations. Ahead lies the road to Charleroi, to Paris, to abdication, and beyond that, an island in the Atlantic that waits with patient inevitability. You realize the war is over, though the world won't know it until tomorrow. The French Empire, the living storm that had once swept across Europe, is gone, its thunder spent, its lightning trapped forever in memory. But tonight, on this ruined field, the echoes linger. The mud still holds the Prince of Greatness, pressed deep enough that even time will take centuries to wash them away. The road from Waterloo to Paris feels longer than any campaign. You travel with the remnants of the French army, men who no longer march but drift, hollow-eyed, muttering fragments of songs that once promised glory. Muskets hang from limp shoulders. The tricolor flag, once bright as dawn, now looks like a bruise flapping in the dust. The silence between them is heavier than the sound of defeat. Napoleon rides near the front of the column, wrapped in his gray coat, hat pulled low. His aides keep their distance. The emperor, who once inspired nations, now seems smaller, as if the weight of Europe pressing against him has finally compressed him into a single, weary man. He doesn't speak. The only sound is the creak of saddle leather and the low murmur of hooves on dirt. Behind you, the guns of Waterloo are still echoing in your ears, phantom thunder that refuses to fade. Every soldier hears it, even those who pretend not to. The battle of the century is over, but its shadow will stretch all the way to Paris. A mainstream historical fact. By the night of June 18, 1815, Napoleon's army had lost over 25,000 men killed or wounded, with another 8,000 captured. The British and their allies suffered around 23,000 casualties, while the Prussians lost roughly 7,000. It was victory bought at terrible cost. Yet, as Wellington later said, nothing except a battle lost can be half so melancholy as a battle won. A quirky tidbit. Rumor spread among the retreating French that Napoleon had been killed at Waterloo. One panicked soldier swore he saw the emperor's ghost on a white horse galloping away. Another claimed Napoleon had turned into an eagle and flown back to Paris. Defeat always breeds strange miracles. By June 20th, the army reaches the outskirts of Lyon, where a few stragglers still carry tattered banners. Villagers watch in silence as the once invincible soldiers stumble through their streets. A child points and whispers, "Are those ghosts?" His mother hushes him, but you can tell she wonders the same thing. Napoleon sets up headquarters in a modest inn. His officers gather in the cramped dining room, their uniforms still spattered with mud and powder. The emperor sits at the head of the table, silent for a long time. Finally, he speaks. "We were beaten, not destroyed." No one answers. They know better. The 7th Coalition armies are already marching on France. The British and Prussians are less than a week's march from Paris. The Austrians and Russians are crossing the Rhine. There will be no time to rebuild, no chance for another miracle. Historians still argue whether Napoleon could have prolonged the fight. Some claim he might have rallied what forces remained and defended the capital. Others insist that the French people, exhausted by decades of war, would have turned against him anyway. In truth, both are probably right. A nation can love a man deeply and still be too tired to follow him one step further. You sit outside the inn that night, listening to the wind move through the empty fields. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sings, a sound too delicate for a world that's just fallen apart. The emperor is still awake, pacing in his room, the floorboards creaking in rhythm with his thoughts. He doesn't curse his fate, he analyzes it. You can almost hear the gears turning. If Grouchy had arrived 2 hours earlier, if Ney had waited, if the rain had stopped sooner. It's the same mental arithmetic he used to build empires, now turned inward, dissecting his own downfall. Around midnight, he calls for a scribe. "Take this down," he says, voice sharp again. He dictates a proclamation to the French people. The nation is in danger, but the emperor will save it once more. Rally to me. The words hang in the air, powerful but hollow. Even his aides exchange uneasy glances. A messenger bursts in, news from Paris. The Chamber of Deputies, led by political opportunists and weary ministers, is already whispering about removing him from power. The emperor's jaw tightens. "Cowards," he mutters. "They'll trade the eagle for the lilies again." The next morning, Napoleon departs for Paris. The journey is a blur of anxious faces and half-hearted salutes. Farmers stop working their fields to watch him pass. Some bow, others turn away. France loves him, but France also fears him, and maybe fears itself even more. As the capital draws near, you can feel the tension. French officials are panicking, debating whether to resist the Allies or surrender the city to spare it from destruction. In the salons, the word abdication passes from mouth to mouth like a secret curse. The emperor arrives on June 21st, slipping into Paris quietly at dawn. No parades this time, no cheering crowds. The same streets that once erupted in adoration now seem unsure whether to welcome or hide him. You can still smell the rain, as if Waterloo had followed him home. He goes straight to the Élysée Palace, his last residence as ruler. The building feels strangely empty, its corridors echoing. His son's portrait hangs in the study, the King of Rome, fair-haired and bright-eyed. Napoleon pauses before it, his gloved hand trembling slightly. He was to have inherited France, he murmurs. Now he'll inherit nothing but my name. That afternoon, ministers from the chamber arrive. They bow stiffly, avoiding his eyes. Sire, one begins. The assembly demands. The nation requires. Napoleon waves him silent. You needn't say it. The play is over. Historians still debate whether Napoleon's second abdication was an act of dignity or despair. Some say he stepped down to spare France another invasion. Others insist he simply recognized defeat when he saw it. Whatever his motive, the moment feels painfully human, like watching a mountain bow to gravity. He signs the document with a single stroke. I proclaim my son, Napoleon II, Emperor of the French. Then he sets down the pen and leans back. The silence afterward is immense. You almost expect thunder, as if history itself needs a sound effect for closure. A quirky detail. After signing, Napoleon asked for coffee. The servant brought it, trembling, and the emperor thanked him politely, then spilled half the cup on his uniform sleeve. Even my hand betrays me now, he said with a faint smile. That evening, he walks alone in the palace gardens. The city hums faintly beyond the walls, carriages, distant laughter, the uncertain heartbeat of a nation waking from a fever dream. Fireflies blink among the hedges. He stops to watch them, eyes unfocused, as if calculating the trajectory of light. History, he murmurs, is written by the victors, until I rewrite it. You follow as he turns toward the house again. Tomorrow he'll leave Paris, escorted by loyal soldiers toward Rochefort, hoping to escape to America. He dreams of exile across the ocean, a quiet farm, a few books, a place to disappear. But even you can feel the irony. The man who conquered half the world will not even control his own destination. Historians still argue whether he truly believed he'd reach freedom. Some think it was a deliberate act of self-delusion, others a final attempt to script his own ending. Either way, the tide of Europe was already closing around him. The night deepens. A storm gathers again over Paris. Low thunder, the same kind that once echoed over Belgium. You imagine Napoleon lying awake, listening to the rain beat against the window pane, wondering if it's the same storm that started at Waterloo and simply followed him home. Outside, you stand beneath a dripping tree, feeling the chill. You think of the millions who once marched for him, the cities renamed in his honor, the crowns he gave and took away. And now, this. A single man in a borrowed room, staring at his boots, the world he built collapsing quietly around him. Still, in the hush between lightning and thunder, you hear something else. Soft, determined, almost defiant. It's the scratch of his quill. He's writing again, dictating to himself perhaps, shaping the story that will outlive him. Because if there's one thing Napoleon Bonaparte refuses to surrender, it's the narrative. And maybe that's the truest kind of empire, the one built in ink instead of blood. The road to Rochefort feels quieter than any road has the right to be. You travel through a landscape that still smells of spring and smoke, the sort of countryside that refuses to believe it just outlived an empire. Villages peek from behind poplar trees, shutters half closed, as if watching a funeral procession. The people who once shouted, "Vive l'Empereur," now whisper it, like a superstition. Napoleon rides ahead on a chestnut horse, dressed in that same weather-stained gray coat. He no longer tries to hide his fatigue. The once restless figure now moves with the rhythm of inevitability. Even his silhouette seems to know where it's headed. His small escort, just a few officers and grenadiers, keeps pace in silence. Each hoofbeat lands like punctuation, the end of a sentence no one wants to finish. A mainstream historical fact. In late June 1815, after his second abdication, Napoleon set out for the port of Rochefort on France's western coast. His intention, or at least his declared one, was to sail for the United States, believing that across the ocean he might find peace, anonymity, and perhaps a farm by the Hudson. A quirky tidbit: he packed not gold or jewels, but a library, some 80 books, mostly on science, geography, and history. "If I must live in exile," he said, "let me at least converse with great minds." But when you reach Rochefort on July 3rd, the illusion of escape shatters instantly. The British Royal Navy is waiting. 2 warships, HMS Bellerophon and HMS Myrmidon, patrol the bay like patient predators. Their masts rise above the horizon, dark and still, every bit as menacing as a cannon aimed at the future. The Emperor's entourage gathers in a rented house near the quay. Maps litter the table, and the air smells of damp salt and tobacco. One aide suggests sneaking out in a small fishing vessel under cover of night. Another proposes disguising Napoleon as a merchant sailor. You can see the absurdity flicker across his face. It's hard to imagine the conqueror of Europe hiding behind a coil of rope. Historians still argue whether these plans were ever realistic. The English blockade was tight. The coast watched. Some think Napoleon hesitated out of pride. He couldn't bear to flee like a fugitive. Others believe he simply misjudged how little leverage he had left. Either way, the days pass in limbo. You walk with him along the shore in the evenings. The Atlantic spreads before you, gray and immense, its wind sharp with brine. Napoleon stops often, staring at the horizon where sky and sea melt together. "There lies liberty," he says softly. Then, after a pause, "And there lie my enemies." He plucks a pebble from the sand, turns it in his fingers, and flicks it into the waves. "Every empire ends this way," he murmurs, washed smooth. That night, the council debates again. Should he try to escape? Should he surrender? Some urge him to seek asylum in Austria, his wife Marie-Louise's homeland. Others warn that the Austrians will hand him to the British anyway. "They fear me too much," he says. "They always did." A fringe anecdote claims that one evening, Napoleon disguised himself in a sailor's jacket and actually boarded a small schooner anchored nearby, testing whether the crew could smuggle him out. A gust of wind nearly blew his hat into the sea, and he laughed. The first real laughter anyone had heard from him in months. Then he returned to shore and ordered the attempt canceled. "It would have been ignoble," he said. By July 14th, word reaches him that the Provisional French government has formally outlawed him. If captured, he will not be treated as a sovereign, but as a criminal. The irony makes him smirk. "They crown me emperor, exile me, recall me, and outlaw me, all in the same decade. France has never been bored, at least." He writes to the Prince Regent of England, declaring that he comes, like Themistocles, to the hearth of the British people, trusting in their generosity. The letter is eloquent, dignified, and hopelessly naive. You can almost feel him crafting his own legend in the phrasing, the way a poet carves an epitaph for himself before the grave is dug. A mainstream fact. On July 15th, 1815, Napoleon boarded the HMS Bellerophon and formally surrendered to Captain Frederick Maitland. He greeted the astonished British officers with calm courtesy, saying, "I come to throw myself upon the hospitality of your prince and your nation." A quirky tidbit: Maitland had ordered his crew to hide their surprise by pretending everything was ordinary. The men later admitted they saluted him as one might salute a thunderstorm, because what else could one do? You stand on the quay as the small boat rows out to meet the Bellerophon. The water slaps gently against its hull. Napoleon sits upright in the stern, hat brim pulled low, the wind tugging at his coat. On shore, his remaining guards stand rigid, some saluting, others weeping openly. You notice one of them, a boy no older than 16, whisper, "Vive l'Empereur." The words sound like a farewell prayer. The moment feels strangely peaceful. There is no music, no ceremony, just the steady rhythm of oars and the faint cry of gulls. When the boat reaches the side of the warship, sailors lower a ladder. Napoleon climbs it unassisted. As he steps onto the deck, the British Marines snap to attention. The flag of St. George flutters above him, his final opponent's emblem, already claiming the last scene. Historians still debate whether this surrender was a calculated gesture or genuine submission. Some believe Napoleon hoped to appeal directly to the British public, imagining himself treated as a distinguished exile, perhaps even allowed to retire quietly in England. Others think he recognized, at last, that every alternative led to humiliation. Either way, once his boots touch that deck, the age of Napoleon ends. For a week, the Bellerophon remains anchored off the coast of Devon, the world's most famous prisoner becoming a national curiosity. Crowds line the cliffs with telescopes, straining for a glimpse. A London paper calls him the lion in the cage. You stand beside him on deck as he studies the English shoreline. Green hills, gray stone villages, children waving handkerchiefs. "So this is Albion," he murmurs. "Pretty." Like a picture painted on a biscuit tin, you almost laugh, but his smile fades quickly. "They will never let me stay here. I can feel it," a mainstream fact. After days of deliberation, the British government decided Napoleon would be sent to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic, chosen precisely because no one could escape from it. A quirky anecdote. When he learned of the plan, Napoleon quipped, "The English are sending me to the moon." Then he added, more darkly, "At least from there I may still watch the world below." That night, you watch him dine with Captain Maitland. The conversation is polite, even warm, though the tension hums beneath it. When the plates are cleared, Napoleon raises his glass and says, "To courage, yours, mine, and history's." Maitland nods, unsure whether he's being thanked or mocked. Later, alone on the deck, Napoleon gazes out across the Black Sea. The stars shimmer overhead, reflected faintly in the waves. He says quietly, "It ends where it began, on the water." You realize he's right. From Corsica to Egypt, from the Nile to the North Sea, the sea has always been his backdrop, a restless mirror for ambition. The ship's bell tolls midnight. You imagine, for just a second, that you can hear the surf of St. Helena already, thousands of miles away, like a whisper crossing time. Before turning in, Napoleon looks toward the horizon one last time. "I have conquered kingdoms," he says softly, "but tonight, I surrender to the wind." You want to answer, but the moment is too fragile. The sails shift, catching the breeze, and the Bellerophon begins to move. The dark silhouette of France fades behind you, swallowed by the sea. Ahead lies Exile, legend, and the slow fading of a man who once believed the world could be arranged like pieces on a map. And though the ocean stretches endlessly, you realize something unsettling. He isn't afraid. Perhaps because, in his mind, he still commands the tide. Morning light rolls across the deck of the Bellerophon. Gold on canvas, silver on the sea. The English sailors move quietly, half in awe, half in disbelief. They're sharing a ship with a legend. You wake to the sound of gulls and footsteps, and for a moment, it's easy to forget that this is no ordinary voyage. Below deck, behind a polished door, Napoleon Bonaparte eats breakfast with the composure of a man at a cafe, not a prisoner sailing toward oblivion. He sits by the porthole, the sunlight tracing the edge of his bicorn hat. "Coffee," he says to the steward, who nearly spills it. Then, after a long sip, he adds dryly, "Better than Elba's." "Worse than Italy's," the crew laughs nervously. unsure if it's safe to laugh at a man who once decided the fate of Europe. You walk with him along the deck. He's more animated now, the fresh salt air reviving the general beneath the Exile. He quizzes officers about their ships, the British Navy, the discipline of their men. He praises their precision, then adds, "A fine machine, but a machine nonetheless." The English make excellent clocks, though they've never invented time. A mainstream historical fact. During his weeks aboard the Bellerophon in July 1815, Napoleon was treated with respect but kept under close watch. He dined with Captain Maitland, exercised on deck, and received a handful of visitors. Crowds gathered along the coast at Torbay and Plymouth just to glimpse him through telescopes. A quirky tidbit: one Englishwoman claimed she could feel Napoleon's presence from 10 miles away and fainted dramatically at the sight of the ship's sails. Victorian tourism began early. Historians still debate how calm Napoleon truly was during those days. Some memoirs describe him as philosophical, resigned to his fate. Others insist he believed the British would eventually grant him asylum in England. You can see traces of both moods. One hour he hums softly, speaking of Caesar and Alexander. The next, he stares into the waves for minutes at a time, lips pressed thin. One evening, as you both lean against the rail, he gestures toward the western horizon. "That way lies America," he says. "Imagine me there, cultivating land, writing books, perhaps giving lectures on the art of war. The Americans admire energy. They might have understood me." He pauses. But England does not admire. It judges. The sea is calm, impossibly vast. You try to picture the Emperor of France teaching strategy at a New York college, or running a vineyard in Virginia, and you can't decide whether it's tragic or absurd. He smiles as if he reads your thoughts. "No," he says, "I would not have lasted long. I was made for storms." By July 23rd, the Bellerophon anchors in Plymouth Sound. The bay fills with boats, thousands of civilians rowing out, waving, shouting, hoping for a glimpse of the captive eagle. The scene is surreal. Fishermen, merchants, even ladies in bonnets craning from rowboats while Marines keep them at bay. From above, it looks like a living wreath surrounding the ship. Napoleon watches from the quarterdeck, arms folded behind his back. "Curious people," he murmurs. "They came to see a monster, but I suspect they found a man instead." He turns to you. "Tell me, do they cheer or hiss?" You listen carefully. The noise is a mixture of both, cheers of admiration tangled with jeers of hatred. "Both," you answer. He nods. "Good. It means I am still alive to them." A British officer brings word from London. The cabinet has met. There will be no asylum. Napoleon will not live in England, nor anywhere in Europe. He will be sent to St. Helena, an island in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, remote, windswept, and nearly unreachable. Napoleon reads the dispatch twice. His only response is a single raised eyebrow. "St. Helena," he repeats. "Where is that? At the end of the world?" The officer hesitates. "Roughly, yes." The emperor gives a thin smile. "Good. I've always liked edges." Historians still argue about that line. Some believe he truly said it. Others think it was invented later to dramatize his dignity. But hearing him now, you believe it. The man thrives on theater. Even his downfall must play to an audience. A quirky anecdote. The British government ordered that no one on the Bellerophon could set foot on English soil, fearing legal complications if Napoleon were technically in Britain. So he became a paradox, physically anchored off England, yet forbidden to touch it. Journalists dubbed him the man between worlds. You watch him pace the deck that evening, his shadow long against the sunset. "They think they've caged me," he says quietly, "but they forget. The cage moves with the bird." He looks at the horizon. "History sails with me. By August 7th, the orders are final. Napoleon will be transferred to the Northumberland, a warship bound for the South Atlantic. The news spreads through Plymouth like fire. The next morning, crowds fill the cliffs, weeping, waving handkerchiefs. Even some of the British sailors avoid eye contact. Napoleon stands by the gangway, dressed in full uniform for the first time in weeks. Green coat of the chasseur, white breeches, the Legion of Honor at his chest. He looks every inch the emperor again, because if he must vanish, he'll vanish as himself. He turns to Captain Maitland, shakes his hand firmly, and says, "You have been a gentleman. Tell your government they may chain me, but they cannot silence me." Then he boards the Northumberland. The crowd roars, a mixture of admiration, pity, and something else you can't name. The cannons boom a salute, and the sails unfurl. Slowly, the ship turns south. Days blend into weeks as the Northumberland carves through open ocean. You stand often on deck beside him, the sky so vast it makes men look like ants. The sea shifts from gray to indigo, the stars at night brighter than any crown. Napoleon spends his time reading, dictating notes, and pacing the deck in circles, his private universe shrinking with every mile. A mainstream fact: the voyage to St. Helena lasted 10 weeks, covering nearly 5,000 miles. Napoleon passed the equator on September 23rd, reportedly joking that he preferred the northern hemisphere. It had better politics. A quirky tidbit: he insisted on holding daily inspections of the ship's cleanliness, lecturing sailors about discipline. Even in captivity, he said, an army or a ship must smell of order. Sometimes you find him sitting alone at the stern, hat off, hair tousled by the wind. He traces shapes on the railing with a fingertip, maps of Europe, perhaps, or dreams of what might have been. One evening, he points upward. "That star," he says, "is mine. It's followed me from Corsica to Moscow. Even now, it refuses to abandon me." You look, but the stars all seem identical. He doesn't care. The important thing isn't whether the star exists, it's that he believes it does. Historians still debate whether Napoleon was ill during the voyage. Some say his health deteriorated rapidly, others that he seemed robust, even cheerful. Watching him, you'd say it's both. His body aging, his spirit refusing to yield. He laughs at the sea spray, jokes with sailors, quotes Voltaire, but at night, you hear him pacing in his cabin, the floor creaking under restless steps. On October 14th, land appears. A smudge on the horizon, jagged and dark. St. Helena. Napoleon stands at the rail for a long time, saying nothing. The island looks forbidding, sheer cliffs rising straight from the ocean topped with clouds. "There," he murmurs, "the last act begins." The ship anchors in Jamestown Bay. You can see green hills dotted with houses, British sentries watching from the shore. A small boat approaches to ferry him to land. Before he descends the ladder, Napoleon turns once more to the sailors assembled on deck. "Gentlemen," he says, "I go to write the rest of my story. Remember, fate is only the name we give to other men's mistakes." Then he steps down, boots striking the rungs in slow rhythm, and the sea carries him away toward the black rocks of his final home. The sky darkens as he lands. Rain begins to fall, soft and steady. You follow in silence, the sound of the surf mingling with the wind. Behind you, the Northumberland waits, sails furled, like a witness unwilling to leave. You realize that the world's most powerful man has just become its most isolated. The ocean closes around him like a curtain, and the applause fades. Yet somehow, standing on the wet stones of St. Helena, he still looks, just for a heartbeat, like he's about to conquer it. The first thing you notice about St. Helena is the wind. It never stops. It scrapes over the cliffs, hisses through the grass, rattles every shutter. Even the palm trees lean permanently inland, as if bowing to an invisible king. You step off the boat and feel the ground tremble under waves battering rock far below. This forgotten speck halfway between Africa and South America is where an empire has come to rest. Napoleon stands beside you, looking up at the narrow road that twists from Jamestown Harbor toward the highlands. "A fine prison," he says, half smiling. Nature is my jailer now. A mainstream historical fact. St. Helena is barely 10 by 6 miles, a volcanic island surrounded by cliffs nearly 1,000 feet high. It's warm, wet, and perpetually fog-draped, a place where letters take months to arrive and years to be answered. The British garrison numbers a few thousand men. Their orders are simple: never let the Emperor escape. The climb inland is brutal. The switchbacks cut through jungle that smells of damp earth and sulfur. Soldiers march ahead carrying crates of books, furniture, and maps, the trappings of a mind that refuses to shrink to island size. Napoleon rides a mule, silent, occasionally coughing into his handkerchief. The rain doesn't fall. It drifts sideways, clinging to your skin like breath. By afternoon, you reach Longwood House, his new residence, a decaying farmhouse perched on a windswept plateau. The roof leaks, the walls are stained green with mildew, and the floors creak like bones. A British officer apologizes for the condition. Napoleon nods politely. It will do. I have lived in tents. Then, after a pause, but tell your governor I prefer them less damp. A quirky tidbit. When he first arrived, Napoleon ordered every mirror removed from his room. I know what defeat looks like, he said. Later, he had them returned, to make sure it doesn't look worse tomorrow. You spend the first night listening to rain hammering the roof. Somewhere down the corridor, a clock ticks too loudly, measuring eternity in seconds. The Emperor sleeps little. At dawn, he walks outside, hands clasped behind his back, pacing the small garden that will become his kingdom. Historians still argue whether the British treatment was harsh or merely cautious. Governor Sir Hudson Lowe enforced strict surveillance. No unsupervised visitors, no letters uninspected, no walks beyond 2 miles without guards. Napoleon called him a jailer disguised as a clerk. Lowe called Napoleon the most troublesome guest in the empire. They were both right. Days settle into rhythm. Mornings for dictation, afternoons for reading or chess, evenings for conversation. His entourage, Generals Bertrand, Montholon, Gourgaud, and the faithful valet Marchand, follow these rituals like priests attending a sacred boredom. You take dictation sometimes, your wrist aching as he walks the room, reciting in bursts. At Austerlitz, the sun broke through the fog at precisely the hour I had foretold. He's not just remembering, he's rewriting. A mainstream fact. On St. Helena, Napoleon produced over 40,000 pages of memoirs, letters, and reflections. Much of what the world knows about his wars comes from these humid rooms. A fringe debate endures over how much he altered for pride's sake. Some historians call it myth-making, others a final campaign, one fought with ink instead of cannon. During the long rains, he grows restless. One afternoon, while the guards sip tea outside, he pulls on a cloak and walks straight into the storm. You follow through waist-high grass, lightning flashing along the ridges. Listen, he says over the wind. Do you hear it? You shake your head. That's Europe, he continues, still arguing about me. When you return soaked and shivering, he laughs. A fine promenade. We have conquered weather at least. A quirky anecdote. Napoleon kept a small rose bush planted from a seed brought on the Northumberland. He watered it himself every morning. She blooms in exile, he said, so I must as well. Yet not all his humor survives. Some evenings he sits by the fire, eyes distant, speaking in half sentences. At Wagram, we were gods, and then the powder was gone. He drinks heavily of watered wine, stares into the flames and murmurs to no one. They will make of me a monster or a myth. Either way, I win. Historians still debate whether these moods were melancholy or calculated performance for posterity. The truth feels more human, both. The island wears him down, physically, emotionally, and in the small humiliations that come with dependency. Even greatness corrodes when soaked too long in loneliness. You watch his health falter through 1817 and 1818. The cough worsens, his stomach cramps return. British doctors argue about diagnosis while the governor refuses requests for better food, suspicious of every complaint. They fear I'll die inconveniently, Napoleon jokes. Or worse, live inconveniently long. Still, he dictates. Whole campaigns pour out of him, each detail precise. Regimental numbers, sunrise angles, the color of uniforms. One night he stops mid-sentence and says, "I remember every drumbeat. Tell them I was never defeated, only outnumbered." You nod, writing it down. It's not quite true, but truth is less important than immortality. A mainstream fact. Rumors later spread that the wallpaper in his bedroom contained arsenic pigment, possibly contributing to his decline. A quirky tidbit, he complained that the wallpaper's green reminded him of the uniform of an English rifleman. "Even my walls are my enemies." As the years pass, Longwood becomes both prison and stage. Visitors from passing ships arrive seeking souvenirs, a glove, a lock of hair, a signature. He entertains them with charm, quoting Voltaire, offering biting commentary on European politics. When one captain apologizes for England's suspicion, Napoleon replies, "I thank your government. It has made me a martyr at no cost to itself." Yet in quieter hours, you glimpse tenderness. He receives letters from his mother in Corsica, news of his son in Vienna, growing up under Austrian tutors, calling himself Franz. Napoleon traces the boy's name on the table with his fingertip. "He was to be my peace," he whispers, "and now he will inherit silence." You spend another Christmas at Longwood. The staff decorates a small tree. The emperor insists on a toast. "To memory," he says, lifting his glass. "She is the last ally who never deserts." Outside, thunder rolls over the Atlantic. Historians still debate his final years. Was he dignified or bitter? Philosopher or ghost? But watching him pace the veranda under that endless wind, you realize both can live in the same man. His pride remains iron, yet his eyes soften when he looks toward the sea. "I used to cross continents," he says. "Now I measure distance by how far I can walk before dinner." A quirky moment. One morning, he finds a snail crawling across his boot. He stoops, moves it gently to a flower pot, and says, "Even emperors can grant mercy." Then he laughs, a laugh lighter than any since Waterloo. By 1820, his strength fails rapidly. Nights bring fever and dreams of battle. He mumbles orders in his sleep, hands twitching as if gripping invisible reins. The doctor recommends rest. He scoffs. Rest is for the living. In early 1821, sensing the end, he dictates his will. "I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people whom I loved so dearly." He adds one final request, that his heart be placed in a silver urn. "If they cannot love me alive, let them cherish what remains." The days grow shorter. You read to him from the Iliad, his favorite passage, the death of Achilles. When you close the book, he murmurs, "The gods are cruel. They grant greatness only to make tragedy worth watching." A mainstream fact. Napoleon died on May 5, 1821, at 5:49 p.m., likely of stomach cancer. A fringe theory persists that slow poisoning hastened it. A quirky tidbit. Just before dying, he reportedly whispered 3 words: France, Army, Josephine. No one knows which mattered most. Outside, the wind finally stills. The garden is quiet. Even the sea seems to pause. You look down at him, eyes closed, expression calm, and realize the impossible has happened. The man who outran history has finally stopped moving. The soldiers fire a final salute. The sound echoes against the cliffs. You expect thunder, but the sky stays clear. Instead, a single gull circles overhead, white against the dark basalt, crying once before disappearing into cloud. Longwood grows silent again. The same silence you heard that first night. The kind that makes clocks sound louder, hearts heavier. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the world already begins to rewrite him. And on that lonely island, with the wind creeping back across the plateau, you whisper the truth that history never admits aloud. He won after all. because we're still telling his story. You wake to the sound of rain, steady, gentle, the kind that seems to weep rather than fall. The shutters rattle, and the air smells of wet stone and roses. Longwood House has become a mausoleum overnight. Soldiers tiptoe through the halls, whispering, as if afraid to disturb something larger than death. Outside, a few locals and sailors gather in the drizzle, hats in hand. The clock on the mantle still ticks. It was stopped briefly when he died, then wound again at dawn, because, as one of the orderlies muttered, he wouldn't have liked wasted time. You stand near the bed, watching the room as it absorbs the weight of finality. His uniform coat hangs neatly on the chair. The sword he once carried across half of Europe rests beside it. Everything feels too ordinary for the man who once rearranged the map of the world. His servants move carefully, polishing his boots, folding his handkerchiefs, performing small acts of loyalty because it's all that remains. He'd have wanted order, one says, straightening the blanket, though it no longer matters. A mainstream historical fact. Napoleon's body lay in state for 2 days in the same room where he died. His remains dressed in his favorite uniform, green coat of the chasseur, white breeches, boots shine to mirror the candles flickering around him. A quirky detail. On his chest, they placed a small medal of the Legion of Honor, and, at his side, the sword he carried at Austerlitz. Even his dead hand rested lightly on it, as if still prepared to draw it. Outside, the wind falls quiet, the first calm St. Helena has seen in months. Some of the soldiers swear the sea itself has gone still. You step out onto the porch and breathe. The rain has ended, but a fine mist lingers, curling like smoke around the hills. The valley below glows faintly green, the grass slick and trembling. For the first time since you arrived, the island doesn't feel hostile. It feels like it's holding its breath. Inside, preparations begin for burial. Governor Hudson Lowe, ever bureaucratic, insists on a modest ceremony. No imperial honors, he says. He is a general, not a sovereign. The French officers protest. Voices rise, then fall again. Even now, Napoleon divides men. They choose a small valley below Longwood, a spot Napoleon himself had once admired during a walk. He had pointed to it and said, "It is peaceful here. If they refuse me France, let them bury me in this shade." It's called Sane Valley, though the locals have already begun calling it La Vallée du Tombeau. Historians still argue whether he truly foresaw this or simply said it for effect. With Napoleon, prophecy and performance were never far apart. You follow the procession on May 9th, 1821. 6 horses draw the black-draped carriage down the muddy road. The soldiers march slowly, rifles reversed, the muffled beat of drums echoing off the cliffs. The British troops line the path in solemn silence. Even Hudson Lowe removes his hat. The French officers walk bareheaded, some weeping openly. The valley is small, surrounded by willows and steep rock walls that trap the sound of footsteps. The air smells of damp grass and new rain. You notice the roses Napoleon planted months ago still blooming near the path, their petals heavy with moisture. It feels almost scripted, as if the island itself understood the need for symmetry. The coffin is lowered into the earth. A priest murmurs the rites. The crowd joins in half-heartedly, words blending with wind. When the first shovelful of soil hits the lid, the sound cuts through everything. Soft, final, unforgettable. A mainstream fact. Napoleon's tomb on St. Helena was unmarked by name for fear that it might become a shrine. The British inscription simply read, "Here lies a Frenchman." Only later, when his remains were returned to France in 1840, did his full title, Napoleon, Emperor of the French, reclaim its place in stone. A quirky tidbit. Before the burial, one of the servants slipped a small silver locket containing a lock of his hair into the coffin. Years later, that same lock would be divided among collectors, each claiming it contained the true strand of the emperor. Even in death, he remained exportable. As the crowd disperses, you linger. The sky is bruised violet. Mist coils through the trees. You crouch near the grave, fingers brushing the damp soil. The willows sway gently overhead, their branches dripping. You think of his voice, commanding armies, quoting philosophers, cursing weather, and now it's gone, reduced to memory and myth. Yet somehow that absence feels larger than presence. One of the soldiers nearby whispers, "It's over." Another shakes his head, "No, it's beginning." Historians still debate that moment too. When does a life end and legend begin? For most men, the line is sharp. For Napoleon, it blurred the instant the first newspaper headline called him immortal. The months that follow pass quietly. Longwood becomes a British outpost again, its rooms stripped of furniture and ghosts alike. The garden overgrows. The rosebush he tended twists into wild vines. Yet ships still stop at the island. Sailors ask to see the tomb, leaving flowers or medals. Even the officers who once guarded him feel compelled to visit, standing awkwardly beside the grave as if apologizing for following orders. A quirky detail? One British lieutenant claimed that on calm nights he could hear faint singing from the valley, the Marseillaise, carried on the wind. Probably imagination, but when you stand there at dusk, you swear the air hums faintly, as though the earth itself remembers. The British eventually tire of the upkeep. Years pass. The world changes. Kings fall, revolutions rise, railways cut across Europe. And still, beneath those willows, Napoleon sleeps. But his name keeps moving. On pamphlets, portraits, and whispers in drawing rooms. Poets compare him to Prometheus. Painters show him brooding beneath cosmic skies. Children in Paris march toy soldiers across tabletops shouting Austerlitz. By the 1830s, public sentiment in France shifts. The new king, Louis Philippe, hoping to mend divisions, requests the emperor's body be returned home. Britain, perhaps weary of guarding bones, agrees. So in 1840, the French frigate Belle Poule sails to St. Helena. You stand again in the same valley, watching as French sailors dig carefully, reverently. When they lift the coffin, witnesses swear a sweet scent fills the air, the perfume of roses that shouldn't have survived the season. Historians call it exaggeration. You call it theater. And Napoleon always did love a final act. The coffin sails for France, draped in tricolor. The voyage is calmer than the first, as if the sea itself has forgiven him. In Paris, crowds flood the streets. Black banners hang from every window. They line the Seine, throwing flowers onto the water as the cortege passes. Bells toll from Notre Dame. It's a coronation played backward. A mainstream fact. On December 15, 1840, Napoleon's remains were interred in Les Invalides, beneath a massive red sarcophagus of porphyry, surrounded by marble statues of victory. His tomb lies under a dome so vast that even whispers echo like sermons. A quirky tidbit. His coffin rests within 6 nested caskets, mahogany, lead, ebony, and more, as if he could still outwit decay. You stand beneath that dome decades later, tourists filing past in silence. The words engraved above the tomb read, "I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people whom I loved so dearly." Light filters through stained glass, catching on gilt reliefs of eagles and laurels. It feels like standing inside a heartbeat slowed by history. Children peer over the railing. Veterans remove their hats. Even now, every sound drops to a reverent hush. You realize that somehow, the man buried beneath your feet did exactly what he said he would. He made the world remember. Historians still argue about everything. His genius, his tyranny, his place among conquerors. But as you watch a small French boy salute the tomb with awkward pride, it's hard to see him as anything but what he always wanted to be: eternal. Outside, Paris hums with life. Carriages, laughter, the bright chaos of a world rebuilt. But inside Les Invalides, the air stays still. And if you listen closely, beneath the echo of footsteps and whispers, you can almost hear him again, saying what he once told his soldiers before battle. "You will tell your grandchildren that you served under me.
And they do. Still.
You stand beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides until your neck aches from looking upward. The air smells faintly of wax, marble dust, and the flowers that pilgrims leave every morning. A ray of sunlight slides across the great sarcophagus, gilding its curves like a sunrise caught in stone. Outside, Paris hums, carriages, shouts, laughter, but here, inside this circular crypt, sound slows and softens. You could almost believe time itself is paying respect.
The guard's boots click on the marble. He keeps his voice low. Every day they still come, he tells you. Students, soldiers, even tourists who don't know why they're crying. You nod. The truth is, no one comes here for Napoleon the politician or the strategist. They come for the story. The man who built an empire out of ideas and stubbornness, who refused to shrink even when caged on a rock in the Atlantic.
You trace the engraved words with your fingertips. I wish my ashes to rest on the banks of the Seine, among the French people whom I loved so dearly. And for a strange moment, you feel he's gotten exactly what he wanted. Not power, not peace, but presence. The kind that never fades.
A mainstream historical fact. When the emperor's remains returned to Paris in 1840, France erupted in something between celebration and confession. Crowds filled the boulevards, throwing laurel leaves and crying openly. Victor Hugo described it as the resurrection of a man through the voice of a nation. A quirky tidbit. One bystander swore that the horses pulling the hearse refused to move until the driver turned them to face the Seine, as if even animals understood the geography of destiny. Historians still argue whether the 19-year-old King Louis-Philippe wanted to honor Napoleon or simply borrow his aura to steady a shaky throne. But intentions fade, symbols stay. You wander out into the courtyard of Les Invalides. The wind carries the faint smell of rain, just like that morning on St. Helena. Paris glitters beyond the gates, alive and unbothered. Its streets now ruled by commerce instead of cannon. You imagine the emperor striding here again, hat under his arm, curious at the city he remade without meaning to. He would recognize the ambition, if not the architecture. Somewhere, a group of school children passes, their teacher gesturing dramatically. And here lies Napoleon Premier, l'homme qui a changé le monde. The smallest boy whispers, "Did he win or lose?" The teacher smiles sadly. Both. You follow the river after dusk. The lamps cast trembling reflections on the water, and for a heartbeat, you think you see a gray figure on the bridge, short coat, hands behind his back, watching the current flow. Then he's gone, replaced by nothing but mist. History, you realize, is less about facts than echoes. Back at your desk that night, you read the memoirs he dictated on St. Helena. The handwriting varies, Bertrand's crisp lines, Montholon's looping script, but the voice is unmistakable, confident, analytical, sometimes almost tender. "I have loved glory more than life," he wrote, "but I would rather have been a good father." You pause over that line. For all the bronze statues and red banners, it's the quieter confessions that make him human. Historians still argue about the truth of his words. Was it regret or performance? But sincerity isn't measured by accuracy. It's measured by how long people remember. You turn a few pages and find another passage. "To understand me, you must understand France. I am she, in miniature, her courage, her contradictions, her dreams of reason, and her taste for chaos." He wasn't wrong. France still reflects him like a mirror tilted toward the past, brilliant and flawed in equal measure. A quirky tidbit. One scholar discovered tiny grease stains on these manuscripts, proof that Napoleon often ate breakfast while dictating philosophy. He once paused mid-sentence about the nature of destiny to ask, "Is there more butter?" Greatness, apparently, still needs toast. You close the book and glance toward the window. Rain has started again. The Seine glows under the streetlights, and you imagine the river carrying fragments of his story downstream. past bridges, past cafes, out toward the sea. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, lies St. Helena, the full circle of a tide that never truly recedes. The world he left behind keeps moving. Steam replaces sail. Kingdoms crumble. Republics rise. Wars multiply with technology he couldn't have dreamed of. Yet each century, someone rediscovers him. Painters turn him into myth. Filmmakers turn him into tragedy. Politicians borrow his posture, and self-help gurus quote his maxims as if they were mantras. Impossible is a word found only in the dictionary of fools. You've seen it on motivational posters in offices that would have bored him to death. But maybe that's the point. He built a vocabulary of ambition so potent that even the ordinary cling to it. Historians still argue about his legacy. Was he a liberator or a tyrant? Did he spread Enlightenment ideals or bury them beneath empire? The truth, as always, is inconvenient. He was both storm and architect. Without him, Europe might have drifted into stagnation. Because of him, it drowned in blood before it bloomed again. A mainstream historical fact. Napoleon's Civil Code of 1804, what lawyers now call the Code Napoleon, still underpins much of European and Latin American law. It replaced feudal privilege with the principle of equality before the law. A quirky tidbit, he bragged, "My true monument is not in marble, but in articles and paragraphs." The man was right. Most people quoting liberty, property, security have no idea they're speaking fluent Bonaparte. You wake before dawn, unable to shake the echo of that sweeping beam of light over Les Invalides. Paris sleeps under a blanket of rain, the cobblestones slick and glistening like black mirrors. You step outside and walk toward the Seine. The air smells of iron and smoke, faintly metallic, as if the city still remembers the sound of cannon. A barge moves under the Pont Alexander III, its lantern casting a soft, golden trail that ripples across the water. The modern world hums awake around you. Electric signs, car horns, the rustle of papers in a cafe. But somehow, his presence hasn't dimmed. 2 centuries later, his fingerprints remain on everything. The straight boulevards, the standardized schools, the bureaucratic order that keeps France running. He's a ghost woven into the infrastructure. A mainstream historical fact. Napoleon's administrative reforms, prefects, the centralized education system, the Bank of France, still structure the French state. Even the lycées, which train the country's elite, were his invention. A quirky tidbit, the original lycée uniform included bicorn hats for students, a decision so unpopular that teenage boys rioted until the rule was dropped. Not even emperors, it seems, can dictate teenage fashion. You pause near a bookstall by the river. Among postcards and watercolors, there's a small stack of biographies. Napoleon with his hand in his coat, eyes distant and tired. The books stretch from century to century, some reverent, some venomous, all certain they've found the truth. You flip one open. The first line reads, "Every generation remakes him in its own image." That's the secret, isn't it? Napoleon never stayed still long enough to be fully captured. For the Romantics, he was a fallen demigod. For the Victorians, a cautionary tale about pride. For modern entrepreneurs, he's a case study in leadership. Even video games now resurrect him as an avatar for ambition. The man has become his own industry. Historians still argue whether this immortality was earned or engineered. Did he know he'd become myth? Or was myth the only armor left to a man stripped of everything else? You remember him at Longwood, dictating by candlelight, "I will shape the memory of what I was." He didn't just fight wars, he fought obscurity and won. You wander through the Rue de Rivoli, its arcades stretching in endless symmetry, another of his urban legacies. The shops are open now, the smell of coffee and croissants floating out. You order one, sit by the window, and watch Paris come alive. The waitress notices your notebook and asks what you're writing.
You tell her, a story about a man who tried to outgrow mortality. She laughs. Ah, so Napoleon. You smile. How did you guess? Because every Frenchman thinks he can be him, she says, pouring more coffee. Even the ones who swear they hate him. A quirky anecdote. When the news of his death reached France in 1821, many Parisians reportedly refused to believe it. One journalist wrote, "He cannot die. He has only gone ahead." That line became a saying. Whenever a soldier fell, comrades would murmur, "He has gone ahead." Even death had to wait in line behind him. You finish your coffee and head toward the Arc de Triomphe. The morning rain has stopped and the great arch gleams like polished bone. Tourists cluster beneath it, snapping photos, unaware that its first design was ordered by Napoleon himself to honor the Grande Armée. He never saw it finished, but its inscriptions still read like a diary of his victories. Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram. You trace the carved names of the dead, feeling the grooves where rain has worn the stone smooth. Beneath your fingers, the letters feel alive, like pulse marks of a story that refuses to fossilize. A guide nearby tells a group, he wanted his soldiers to march home beneath triumph, not silence. Historians still argue about whether that was arrogance or empathy. Maybe it was both. Napoleon understood better than anyone that glory was the only currency time never devalues. You climb to the top. From there, the city stretches in all directions, the radiating avenues he envisioned, the geometry of control masquerading as beauty. In the distance, the golden dome of Les Invalides glows again, catching the sunlight between clouds. The symmetry of it all feels deliberate, like his ghost laid out the blueprints. For a moment, you imagine his voice beside you, explaining the view as if briefing a general. Always the high ground. From here, you can see everything. Then, silence. You wake late, sunlight pouring through the thin curtains of your hotel window. Paris already humming beneath you. Street vendors call out over the noise of scooters and distant sirens, but all you can think of is how strange it is. How the life of one man, dead for 2 centuries, still vibrates through every stone of this city. You stretch, open the window, and let the air in. It smells of croissants and car exhaust and rain-soaked history. You take your notebook and head toward the Seine again. On the way, you pass a souvenir stall. Postcards, miniatures, plastic busts of Napoleon, some serious, some comically wide-eyed. The vendor grins at you. €2, monsieur, or 3 for 1 if you're a student of glory. You laugh and buy one, not because you need it, but because you understand exactly what he means. Glory has become a brand, and the emperor, its eternal logo. A mainstream historical fact. After his death, Napoleon's likeness appeared on more objects than any other figure in the 19th century. Coins, clocks, snuff boxes, even teacups. A quirky tidbit. In the 1860s, a British tailor advertised a Napoleon waistcoat, said to instantly improve posture and confidence. People bought it in droves. Apparently, empire can be worn, if not won. You cross the Pont Neuf and pause halfway, watching boats cut through the gray-green water. The wind ruffles the surface into little waves that glitter in the light, like shreds of old metals. You think of that tiny island again, the rain, the willows, the quiet grave. All that motion, all that ambition, reduced to the stillness of one small valley. And yet somehow, you realize, the movement never stopped. It just changed form. He conquered territory once. Now he conquers imagination. Historians still argue whether the world became better or worse because of him. Some call him the father of modern Europe, others, the butcher of it. But no one denies the gravitational pull of his story. It's the same fascination that makes people slow down for storms or stare into volcanoes. He's dangerous, magnificent, and, in some way, familiar. Because deep down, everyone has a piece of Napoleon inside them. The part that refuses to settle for ordinary. You keep walking until the path leads you into the Jardin des Tuileries, where tourists sit by the fountains and pigeons strut with military precision. The garden was once part of his empire's stage too. He ordered statues moved here to remind Parisians that art should inspire power, not leisure. Now lovers eat sandwiches on the marble steps where ministers once argued over treaties. Time is efficient at rearranging meanings. A group of school children run past, waving paper flags. You catch fragments of their chatter. Waterloo, Josephine, Elba. They're rehearsing for a school play. The smallest boy salutes you dramatically and shouts, "Vive l'Empereur!" before his teacher scolds him and laughs. You wave back anyway. Some myths survive precisely because they're fun to imitate. A quirky anecdote. In 2015, on the bicentennial of Waterloo, France declined to send an official delegation to the ceremony. The foreign minister said, "We do not commemorate defeats." The Belgian host smiled and replied, "Then you must commemorate him every day." That night, you attend a small gathering at a university lecture hall. The topic, Napoleon in the Modern Imagination. A panel of historians, novelists, and one eccentric military reenactor sit at a long table under harsh fluorescent light. The audience is a mix of students, professors, and a few curious passers-by who probably came for the free wine afterward. The first speaker, a scholar in thick glasses, begins. "We remember Napoleon not because he changed the world, but because he embodied change itself. Every century rediscovers him when it needs to feel alive again." The novelist beside him interrupts. "Alive or guilty? We make heroes of men like him so we can borrow their courage without paying their price." The room murmurs approvingly. Then the reenactor, a man with sideburns and a replica uniform, leans into his microphone. "With respect, I think the emperor would say you're all overthinking it. He just wanted to win." Laughter ripples through the room. The scholar adjusts his notes. "Yes, but to win what?" And there it is. The question that has never found a resting place. What exactly was he chasing? Power? Legacy? Perfection? Or maybe just the simple, intoxicating act of forward motion? Historians still argue whether Napoleon ever believed his own destiny, or merely used it as fuel. Some call him a secular prophet, others an addict of momentum. The truth probably lies somewhere between. He was a man who feared stillness the way others fear death. You listen as the debate continues. The novelist quotes his letters to Josephine, burning, frantic, contradictory. The scholar recites excerpts from the Memorial of Saint Helena, written by his aides in exile, describing him as philosopher, victim, and occasional egomaniac. The reenactor sips water and mutters, "He'd hate this." And you think, yes, he would. He'd hate being dissected, explained, cataloged. He'd want to interrupt, take the podium, redraw the lecture schedule. He'd turn the evening into a campaign. When it ends, the audience applauds politely. You walk outside, notebook under your arm, the air cold and wet again. The Eiffel Tower glows in the distance like a New Age obelisk. A car passes, radio playing a pop song whose chorus repeats, "We could rule the world." You laugh quietly to yourself. Napoleon would have approved of that hook. Back in your room, you review the notes of your journey, from Waterloo to Longwood, from St. Helena to Paris. It feels less like history and more like an orbit, circling a single gravitational point. You realize something strange. Every place he touched, from the muddy ridge of Mont Saint-Jean to the marble floor of Les Invalides, carries the same atmosphere, a mix of noise and silence, triumph and regret. That duality might be his truest invention. A mainstream historical fact. Napoleon was one of the first modern figures to cultivate image deliberately. He commissioned artists to portray him crossing the Alps calmly on a rearing horse, when in reality he rode a mule in the snow. A quirky tidbit, he personally approved the exact angle of his profile used on coins, slightly upward to suggest vision. "Even when reduced to metal," he said, "I must look toward the future." You glance at your reflection in the window glass.
The city lights blur around your face, ghost-like, and for a heartbeat, you almost see him there too. Shoulders square, eyes alight with calculation. Maybe history doesn't haunt us. Maybe we haunt history. You jot another note. The emperor's truest empire was imagination. Ours, not his.
Morning again. A pale light leaks through the gray Paris sky, and for the first time you notice how the city seems to stretch awake like an old soldier, stiff at first, then alive with rhythm. You leave your hotel early, boots striking the wet pavement, the smell of bakeries already curling through the streets. As you pass the newsstands, you see a magazine cover, The Return of the Emperor, Napoleon in Film, Memory, and Myth. His profile stares back from glossy paper, that familiar hand-in-coat pose modernized with cinematic shadows. Even now, he's marketable.
A mainstream fact. Every decade since his death, some new wave of culture revives him. 19th century poets wrote elegies. 20th century directors turned him into legend. 21st century algorithms now analyze his strategies in leadership podcasts. A quirky tidbit. In 2023, data scientists used artificial intelligence to simulate his voice based on surviving phonetic descriptions, producing a virtual Napoleon who could speak his memoirs. Listeners said it felt both inspiring and eerie, as if history were calling collect. Historians still argue whether such revivals honor or exploit him. Some say they distort his memory. Others insist that reinvention is exactly what he would have wanted. After all, Napoleon loved control more than accuracy. If people believe it, he once said, then it is true enough. You cross Place de la Concorde, where once the guillotine stood. The air here hums faintly, as if haunted by applause and screams mixed together. You imagine him walking this same square after his coronation, surveying Paris with the same analytical calm he brought to a battlefield. Now electric buses glide where his carriages thundered, and tourists snap selfies near fountains he ordered built. Time is efficient at rearranging pride, too. You wander into a small side street near the Musée de l'Armée, where antique dealers display faded maps, medals, and sabers behind dusty glass. You stop at one particular case, a tarnished locket with a miniature portrait of Josephine inside. Her eyes are soft, a little sad, as if she already knows the end. The shopkeeper notices your stare. Authentic, you ask. He shrugs. Perhaps, but that doesn't matter. The story is the gold, and that's when it hits you. The realization that everything around you, from the souvenirs to the statues to the scholarship, exists because people keep buying his story. Napoleon may have lost at Waterloo, but he conquered the marketplace of memory. A quirky anecdote. One collector once paid the equivalent of $400,000 for a lock of his hair. When tested, it turned out to belong to a horse. The buyer didn't demand a refund. It's the idea that counts, he said. He wrote it, maybe. You stop by Les Invalides one more time before leaving Paris. The golden dome glows against the overcast sky, brighter than it has any right to be. Inside, the air is cool, reverent. Tourists murmur, their voices echoing up the marble walls. You step closer to the railing and look down at the sarcophagus once more. The light falls perfectly on it, like a spotlight waiting for an actor to enter. For the first time, you don't feel awe or melancholy, just quiet understanding. He isn't really here, not entirely. Pieces of him are scattered across the world, in the laws of nations, in the words of dreamers, in the data sets of engineers, in the metaphors of poets. His bones rest in stone, but his reach has gone digital. Historians still argue about whether that persistence is deserved. Some say it's nostalgia for clarity in a world too complicated. Others claim it's proof that ambition, even dangerous ambition, will always seduce us. You lean on the railing, and the echo of footsteps reminds you of drums fading down a battlefield road. You whisper, almost without meaning to, so this is what victory looks like. Evening settles over the plain, The wind eases, the clouds thin, and the horizon glows faintly orange before giving in to dusk. You stand for a long while, letting the last light fade behind the lion's mound. The tourists have gone, the parking lot is empty. Only the sound of the wind through wet grass remains. You realize that for the first time since you began this journey, there's nothing left to visit. No more monuments to climb, no more archives to consult, no more echoes to chase. It's just you, the field, and the shadow of a man who has outlived everything that once opposed him. You start walking toward the edge of the battlefield, where a narrow road winds between hedges. Your footsteps sink into mud, and with each step you imagine you're walking backward through history, through the smoke, through the shouts, through the impossible roar of a dream coming undone. For a moment, the illusion is so strong you almost see it. Blue coats advancing, horses rearing, cannon wheels grinding through mud. You blink and they vanish, leaving only the soft patter of rain on grass. A mainstream historical fact. By nightfall on June 18, 1815, Napoleon's empire was finished. His army dissolved in panic. Thousands threw away weapons and uniforms to escape the chaos. The next morning, British and Prussian patrols found the field littered with broken drums, shattered muskets, and torn flags. A quirky tidbit: Wellington refused to walk the battlefield immediately after victory. "I have had enough of this," he said. "The next dreadful thing to a battle lost is a battle won." You reach a small farmhouse, the same one once used as Wellington's command post. Its white walls gleam in the moonlight, freshly restored but still carrying scars of cannon fire. You step inside. The museum is closed, but the scent of old wood and damp stone fills the air. Standing there, you imagine him, Wellington, exhausted, sitting by the window with a glass of brandy, realizing he had just defeated the most famous man alive. History tends to celebrate the winners, but tonight even victory feels like another form of exile. You sit on the threshold, listening to the distant hum of modern traffic on the highway that now cuts across part of the old battlefield. Somewhere far off, a train horn wails. The world has moved on. And yet, if you close your eyes, you can almost sense Napoleon's restless pacing across time, still arguing his case, still dictating, still refusing to be reduced to silence. Historians still argue what kind of man he truly was: hero or tyrant, savior or usurper. But you find yourself thinking that maybe the question is irrelevant. Every empire, every age, every person who dares to dream too big eventually collides with limits. Some accept them. A few keep pushing until the world pushes back. He simply pushed further than anyone else. A quirky anecdote. In 1900, an American inventor patented a board game called Napoleon at Waterloo. The tagline read, "Can you win where he failed?" The irony was perfect. The first modern war game turned his final defeat into entertainment. 2 centuries later, people still play it online, adjusting troop movements with a mouse instead of a map. Strategy never dies. It just upgrades its interface. You begin walking again, following the small path that curves back toward the village. The moonlight reflects off puddles like fragments of polished steel. The air smells of grass and smoke and something faintly metallic, like the memory of battle itself. You realize how fragile it all was. The glory, the terror, the idea that one man's will could bend continents. And yet, even knowing its futility, you feel a strange admiration. To live that intensely, even for a moment, is more than most lifetimes allow. You stop beside a low stone wall, running your hand along its rough surface. The stones are cold, damp, ancient. Beneath them, perhaps, lie fragments of the past, buttons, bullets, bones. You whisper softly, "Was it worth it?" And in the silence that follows, the only answer is the wind. Historians still argue that question too. Some say his wars destroyed Europe's youth.
Others insist they built the modern age. Maybe they're both right. Maybe that's how history works. Each generation trading blood for progress, tragedy for transformation. Napoleon understood that bargain better than anyone. To make an omelet, he once said, you must break a few eggs. He just forgot how many lives count as a few. You reach the small inn where you're staying. The sign swings in the breeze, creaking softly. Inside, the fire is low but warm, and the smell of wood smoke fills the room. You sit at a corner table and order wine. The innkeeper, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, notices your damp coat. You came from the field, he says. Tourists usually come in daylight. I'm not a tourist, you answer quietly. He chuckles. No, I can tell. You've got the look of someone who listened too long to ghosts. You raise your glass to that. He's right. The ghosts have been generous companions. A mainstream historical fact. Napoleon's final wish, to be buried on the banks of the Seine, was fulfilled 19 years after his death. A quirky tidbit. When the coffin was opened in 1840, witnesses swore his body had barely decayed. He sleeps like one merely resting from a long march, wrote an officer. Science calls it good preservation. His followers called it proof of destiny. The fire pops. You sit in silence, watching the flames. For all his complexity, his contradictions, his relentless hunger for control, Napoleon ended as all humans do. Small, still, and surrounded by the stories others tell about him. But those stories, your mind keeps circling back. Those stories are what keep him alive. You finish your wine and step outside. The rain has stopped. The air is heavy with fog, the kind that softens edges and hides distances. The moon drifts behind a thin veil of cloud. You walk a few paces down the road, look back at the dark shape of the battlefield, and feel something like peace. Maybe that's what he never learned, to let silence stand without trying to conquer it. The night deepens, and your pace slows. The fog curls low, clinging to the grass like breath. Each sound, crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, feels softened, gentler, as though the world itself is exhaling. You stop beneath a lone tree at the edge of the plain, its branches reaching outward like an old salute. Somewhere far away, a clock strikes midnight. The sound drifts across the fields, folding into the mist. You breathe in, the air cool and wet, the kind that tastes faintly of iron and memory. You think of St. Helena again, of waves breaking against black rock, of rain tapping on the roof of Longwood, of an aging emperor staring out to sea. You think of him writing, revising, dreaming, still refusing to be forgotten. The wind rises once more, soft but steady, wrapping around you like a sigh. It carries the faint scent of wet soil, of smoke, of something older than either victory or defeat. You whisper, barely audible, "Rest now." And in that quiet, you feel it. The great machine of history pausing for just a heartbeat, as if to listen. The noise fades, the air stills, and all that remains is a low hum, not of war or glory, but of endurance, the kind that outlasts empires and monuments alike. You close your eyes. The last thing you hear before sleep claims you is the whisper of the grass, rustling like pages turned by an unseen hand. History continues to write itself, but for tonight, it lets you rest.